Everybody. So we're at about 10 minutes after, so I don't want to wait any longer. Thank you for the few of you that ventured out, especially with this crazy COVID. This is my first time in this upstairs room in this building, and it really is beautiful. So at least we can say hi to a few of our friends. I want to welcome people on the computer. I feel like I'm echoing.
No, out here, not. I think they're.
Oh, so. Oh, I see Dr. Celia. Hello.
Hello.
Hi. So, yeah, we've got a full agenda for you, and I want to get started. Some of our speakers are coming to us virtually. We have a couple of other speakers that are here. And so we're going to try to do this for everybody's benefit. So first of all, just making sure that you're all aware of how this actually came to be is that in January of 2020, the Wyoming County Youth Bureau received a grant. The grant was to educate and bring awareness to the topic of human trafficking and child sexual exploitation. So, you know, I have to be honest, the very first thing, you know, as the director of the office of, from the Youth Bureau, I said, do we have a problem here? It just wasn't something that was on my radar. And since that day and, you know, beginning the whole education and awareness process, I have met some really, really educated people, some of whom you're going to hear from today. And we've invited them to give you different perspectives of what this looks like. So I do want to tell you who our speakers are. We're going to start this morning with Dr. Celia Mcintosh. And I've got a nice little write-up here about her. I just want to let you know what her experience is. She is actually, I'm not going to read all the initials, but she is a nurse practitioner, RN, FNP, all kinds of different initials after her name. But probably the thing that I like the most is she's the chair of the Rochester Regional Coalition Against Human Trafficking. And she joined that coalition in 2014 after learning a little bit more about the horrific crime of human trafficking at an awareness event at Rochester General Hospital. So she's been president of this coalition, and she's been instrumental in moving the coalition ahead in the greater Rochester area. I'm going to let her tell you a little bit about some of the campaigns that they've run there, but in 2017, Celia spoke about the misconceptions and realities surrounding human trafficking, and you know, we wanted to pick her brain a little bit from that. She's also presented on Human Trafficking 101 for emergency medicine providers at Rochester General Hospital and a lot of other places too. Celia is very passionate about ending human trafficking and becoming a voice for policy and social change. She has an associate in nursing from Monroe Community College, a bachelor's degree in nursing from Brockport, a master's in nursing, and her doctorate of nursing from St. John Fisher. Welcome, Celia.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm just going to share my screen when you're ready.
Okay, so I'm also going to introduce a few other people just quickly. We have Special Agent Jennifer Amo with us on Zoom, and she has been a special agent with the FBI for 22 years. She's been assigned to work with human trafficking and investigations for the past 16. Special Agent Amo is a founding member of the Western New York Human Trafficking Task Force in Buffalo, and she'll probably tell us a little bit more about herself. And then Jennifer has a sidekick in investigator Jake Stahley, who's right here. And Jake is coming up on his 15th year in law enforcement and is currently employed with the Chautauqua County Sheriff's Office. He formerly worked in road patrol, and he serves now on the Criminal Investigation Division, specializing in special victim cases and human trafficking. He attended the academy in 2005 and obtained an associate's degree in criminal justice from Monroe Community College. Throughout his career, Investigator Stahley has held positions as a member of the Special Weapons and Tactics Team, field training officer, a negotiator with the Crisis Negotiation Team, firearms instructor, General Topics Academy instructor, and member of the Western District of New York Human Trafficking Task Force. In addition to several commendations, he was awarded the Sheriff's Medal of Valor in 2015. A connection was made with FBI Special Agent Jen Amo, who guided Investigator Stahley through the dark and lucrative world of human trafficking. And since then, the Sheriff's Office in Chautauqua County has established a local tip line for investigating the numerous trafficking complaints. Investigator Stahley participates in training law enforcement in this topic, in general, the general public and other working professionals. And he put a little quote here: "I am a passionate advocate for the victims of this awful crime, and even more passionate for bringing those traffickers responsible to justice and holding them accountable." So welcome. And lastly, we have another person on Zoom. Her name is Deborah Kuehner. Deb is passionate about bringing the healing process to broken and hurting people. When people experience severe trauma and life becomes unmanageable, it's not uncommon for their lives to unravel. Through her work at Potter's Hand Foundation, as their founder and executive director, she has the opportunity to see broken lives restored. Her educational experience includes a bachelor's degree of social work from Mansfield University and a master's degree in literacy education from Elmira. Deb has 30 years of experience working with youth adults and youth at risk through a variety of programs and ministries. In 2012, after teaching for 15 years, she felt called to help women who have been sexually exploited. And she founded the Potter's Hand Foundation in 2013 and has been working to create awareness and build a year-long residential program for these women since that time. In January of 18, the home opened and they transitioned from a counseling and mentoring program with survivors of sex trafficking to a residential program where they can serve up to 12 women at a time. Since 2018, they have served over 25 women from all over the United States. So welcome to Deb. And lastly, I've got Lauren Berger here. Lauren's giving me her bio right now. So she's a training coordinator at Restore Sexual Assault Services, the support program for those impacted by sexual and domestic violence. At Restore, she organizes and provides training programs on multiple topics to a range of audiences, from elementary school right up to professionals. Like other Restore staff, she also backs up the direct service to survivors and works on filing orders of protection and answering the hotline. She'll be actually celebrating 7 years here. I think I've known you for all 7 of those. And prior to Restore, Lauren was a member of AmeriCorps and worked in the Hornell area Concern for Youth. She has a bachelor's degree in communication and rhetoric from Nazareth College and lives in Mount Morris with her 3 kitty cats, Zeke, Spencer, and Gideon. So I'd like to get right into the meat of this, and that's where Dr. Celia comes in. I really wanted Dr. Celia to begin the process of introducing us to the definition of what we're talking about and the differences between prostitution and child exploitation and that sort of stuff. So take it away, Doctor.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen here. 1 second. Okay, can everybody hear me okay?
And you back there?
Okay. So I'm Dr. Celia Mcintosh, and so just to give you a little more background, I have a passion for law and nursing. Law has always kind of been that first thing that I wanted to do and still want to pursue. So in 2013, I decided to bridge my love for law and nursing and started doing some SANE kits. So basically collecting forensic evidence. And after doing that for about a year, I just kind of felt like I wasn't really helping anyone. I would go in, I would collect the evidence, and I wouldn't see this individual again. We would refer them to Strong for their follow-up care, and that would be the end of the relationship. So there wasn't any continuity. So I decided I wasn't going to do that anymore. And as I was walking through the hallways to work, I saw the coalition, and they started talking to me about human trafficking, and I was in awe. I didn't realize something like that happened, nor did I realize that it happened here in Rochester. And the fact that someone could trick you and, you know, exploit your vulnerabilities of someone being homeless or being, you know, having a history of child abuse or just mental illness. And the fact that someone can exploit all those areas, I really felt called to do something about it, to learn some more information about it. And that's when I really started getting active in the coalition. Took some time off to get my doctorate. And then since 2016, I've been the president. And we really focused on bringing education and awareness to different organizations and different communities, because similar to me, if I didn't know anything about it and I had been to 4 different schools of nursing, then I know that a lot of my other colleagues that I was working with day to day did not know how to recognize these individuals. So from that time, we've just been on the quest to increase education and awareness in whatever community is willing to hear about the issue. So that's just a little bit of the background for me. So I don't have any disclosures. And I'm not going to hit every point on the slides. I just really want to give you a little overview. The coalition has essentially been in existence since 2013. It has individuals and organizations. So some of the organizations that are doing direct services in our community are affiliated with us. So like Angels of Mercy, Center for Youth, Bright Star Community, who's currently in the process of developing a home for victims of sex trafficking. Our mission is essentially dedicated to eradicating human trafficking in our communities, and we do that through education, through advocacy, through networking with other individuals and organizations.
Dr. Celia?
Yes.
This is Andrea again. We're getting a lot of feedback from your speakers and having trouble hearing you. It sounds like something is scratching in the background. I wondered.
Can you hear me
now? We don't hear it.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Huh? Yeah, we're hearing more than just your voice.
Oh, okay, let me try. Can you hear me better now?
That's better, right?
Okay. All right. So let me just get to the next slide. Okay, so basically, when we think about human trafficking, we know that somewhere in this area right now, specifically Rochester and all over the world, at least a woman or a man is selling him or herself on Lyle Avenue and knows that no one will provide them the food or shelter or the drugs that they're addicted to if they don't earn money in this way. We know that someone in the restaurant is working from the time the doors opened to the time they close every day. They believe they're paying off a debt that they owe to someone who has helped them get into the country, but they can't pay off the debt. Every day it keeps growing, not shrinking. Can you still hear me okay?
Yes, can you in the back? Okay, yes.
So a teenager in the suburbs is being sold through an online classified site by a pimp. And we know that children in elementary school can be forced to engage in sexual acts, which are filmed and sold online. So those are just some other ways that this human trafficking is happening. So when we think about human trafficking, we are actually in the 20-year anniversary of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. And this is essentially what made human trafficking a crime. Now, I would tell you that every state is different in terms of their age requirement under the age of 18, but at the federal level, this is the definition that's used. So essentially, human trafficking is a crime. It's essentially when someone is exploited for the purpose of compelled labor or commercial sex act through force, fraud, or coercion. So that could involve someone being beat,
raped, their ID being taken, someone, blackmailing them, as I talked about. Maybe this elementary kid is being blackmailed after a video has been made and that's circulating online. That's a form of fraud. There's also coercion, maybe, chemical coercion. Oftentimes, many of these individuals are coerced to start using drugs, and the drugs then become essentially the pimp and is used as a form of control. So, and then of course, other forms of psychological manipulation, like if you love me, you will do this for me. So there's a lot of different variation with that, but for anyone over the age of 18, there has to be the element of force, fraud, or coercion. The only time this is different is when someone is younger than 18 years of age and is induced to perform a commercial sex act. Regardless of it, you don't have to prove the force, the fraud, or coercion. And I know some of my colleagues will probably speak specifically to that. But essentially, someone is being exploited for someone else's financial gain. And oftentimes, weaved in here could also be survival sex. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a financial exchange. It could be an exchange for food. It could be an exchange for, a location to stay, or something else of value. It doesn't always have to be money. So when we talk about the elements of trafficking, there has to be an action, a means, and a purpose. So whether that's someone's being solicited through the advertising, that happened here in Rochester. Stephen Jones, he was convicted of 25 years. He was known to be the worst human trafficker the Rochester Regional had ever seen. He had over 30 women working for him. He would recruit them from East High School mainly, and he would essentially have ads of them on Backpage.com. He would take them to different hotels in Rochester and Buffalo and Albany, and they would be sold essentially through this social media site, this online website, and he would take all their money. He would beat them. He would brand them. His motto was "by any means," and in the newspaper that circulated here, there were several women that had those tattoos on their backs, on their necks, on their fingers. So that is one of the mechanisms that he used. And of course, human trafficking does not have to involve movement. Oftentimes people think, oh, it happens over in China. That doesn't happen here. We know that oftentimes victims can be trafficked out of their own home. So they don't necessarily have to be moved out of their own communities. And of course, the means of the force, the fraud, coercion, like I said, with the caveat of minors being underage. And then, of course, it has to be forced commercial sex exploitation or an act, or forced labor. So whether that's you working on a farm, whether you're working as a nanny, maybe in terms of labor trafficking, maybe you were told you were going to come to this country, we're going to pay you $11 an hour, you were going to get paid, overtime after 40 hours, you were going to, stay in like hotels. And then when you get here, I may be paying you $1 an hour. You're working, from the time the door opened to the door closed. You're staying in unsafe conditions. Essentially, maybe you're staying in a trailer where there's 5 or 10 other people. So the conditions are not optimal. So there's a variation for that. So when we talk about some of the different types, the TVPA defines sex trafficking and labor trafficking as the severe forms. I will tell you that oftentimes people don't talk about labor trafficking because sex trafficking essentially represents like 73% of the cases. We don't, and even though we say that, we have to understand that the statistics and the data is not really representation. It's not really correct in a sense, because oftentimes victims aren't coming in saying, hey, I've been a victim of trafficking. Half the time they don't know that they're victims. And it's through a lot of, relationship building that you're able to get that information. So other forms of human trafficking also includes baby farms, and that's more internationally, but this also includes organ trafficking, which a lot of people don't really understand that falls into this category, but that's also happened as well. So what does it look like globally? We know that over 40 million victims fall victim to this modern day slavery. We know that trafficking occurs in every country. We know that it happens in all 50 of the United States. I would tell you that New York State has the 4th highest call volume. Anyone can be a victim. Typically, the highest percentage of victims are women and girls, but we know that men can also be victims. Anyone identifying as LGBTQ in the or IAX are also victimized too. So it doesn't have boundaries for just women and girls. Anyone can be trafficked. We also know that this industry is said to generate over $50 billion annually, and that's been said to be more than Starbucks, Google, and Nike combined. Are you still hearing me okay? I just want to double check. Okay. All right, and so this is the graph that basically talks about how we are have the 4th highest call volume. A couple years ago when I started in the coalition, we were the 5th. So I'm not sure if this is because there's more education and awareness about human trafficking, and therefore people are recognizing that this is the issue more so now, or if there's just, you know, if there's actually just an uptick in trafficking. So this is a really good slide because oftentimes, like I said, people, when you're talking about human trafficking, there's a barrier of trying to get individuals to understand that it happens here and, you know, how it happens. Oftentimes people think of the movie Taken when they hear about human trafficking, and it's often not. I'm not saying that people cannot get abducted and this happened to them, but what I am saying is that there is a huge relationship component to human trafficking, especially sex trafficking. If you look on this slide here, you see that the highest portion of it is intimate partner, marriage proposition, familial. Oftentimes, you know, maybe there's someone posing as if they're a model agency, and that's how they kind of lure individuals. For labor trafficking, it's often that job opportunity. If you're living somewhere where there's, you know, the government's corrupt or there's not a lot of opportunity, if someone says, I can take you here, you're going to work, you know, these hours, you're going to make a lot of money, you're going to be able to send that money back to your family and support them, then that really looks like great. They're selling you a dream. So in terms of the healthcare providers in the room, you know, many of the risk factors that set people up to be trafficked are, you know, is this someone that has substance abuse? Is this someone that's, you know, maybe doesn't have their basic needs met, runaways, homeless? When we talk about mental health concerns, oftentimes involvement in the child welfare system, foster homes, juvenile justice system. Oftentimes those situations set someone up to be victims of trafficking. One of the biggest ones when we think about recent migration, relocation, when we think about even COVID-19, how that's kind of, you know, when we talk about the homelessness, when we talk about, you know, people not being able to pay their rent, and, you know, there's a lot of legislation going on right now to really get people to stay in these homes, because we know that this is also going to set them up to be at risk. When we talk about other issues like hurricanes, Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Harvey, all those chaotic situations displace individuals and they are at increased risk. When we talk about really the methods of the force, the fraud, or coercion, what we see is that on the second slide, that physical abuse is often at the bottom, and oftentimes, you know, that's usually, not that it doesn't happen frequently, but on here, what I suspect when this is listed at the bottom is that oftentimes, you know, the traffickers want to keep the physical trauma down because they want to keep this low on the radar. So they'll do more things like isolation or economic or emotional abuse. And then, you know, of course, just really threats of any kind. And oftentimes there's a huge overlap between domestic violence and human trafficking, as we know, and victims are reluctant to disclose these situations because of various things, whether that's fear, shame, guilt, or low self-esteem, or the fact that they may be bonded to the trafficker or have Stockholm syndrome. So I just put this slide up here because I want individuals to understand that it's not just over here in Asia or Africa. It does happen here. And with this last data rollout, what we found out was that US citizens actually have a little higher vulnerability than foreign nationals. So it is happening here in our communities. Why is this such a huge problem? Demand. If there wasn't a demand for it, there wouldn't be a supply, but definitely greed, violence, corruption. And like I said, when we think about things like natural disaster, it just creates a chaotic situation. Even when we talk about family separation and a lot of things that were happening at the border, kids being separated from the families, it sets them up for this vulnerability. Okay, so why do individuals, this is just the same thing. Why are individuals at risk? When we talk about poverty, I will tell you that here in Rochester, we are the third poorest city out of 75 metropolitan in size. That in itself increases the risk for trafficking. Undocumented immigrants, victims of violence. What the literature suggests is that victims of child abuse child abuse itself is the #1 predictor for human trafficking. And then of course, like we talked about, mental illness, when we talk about language barriers, and when we talk about, recognizing these individuals in the healthcare system, if they have a language barrier and someone's presenting with them that's doing all the interpretation for them, then that also kind of eliminates us being able to really recognize them if we're not having those interpreter services in place. So that in itself, and coupled with time constraints, can make them at risk. And then of course, homelessness, substance abuse, and prior victims of violence. So when we're talking about the impact of victims, I will tell you that this was the landmark study that really got me thinking that I needed to do more and start talking about this issue. In 2014, Laura Letter and her colleague, they did a survey, and what they found out of these 106 victims that they had surveyed, that 88% of these victims were coming in contact with healthcare providers, but they weren't connected to services, they weren't even recognized. Let me put this in context for you. One person is trafficked every 30 seconds. One person has a stroke every 40 seconds. Someone dies of a heart attack every 43 seconds. Someone dies of heart disease every 90 seconds. So my point of telling you that is there are individuals that are being trafficked at a higher rate than individuals that are coming into the hospital with serious medical emergencies. But we often overlook them or miss them because they're not coming in with aphasia. They're not coming in with left side weakness. They're not clutching their chest. Oftentimes the bondage is in their mind, and they're not going to present and say, hey, my chief complaint is I'm a victim of trafficking. That's not going to happen typically. So it's harder to recognize them. I will also state that, what we know about this is that oftentimes many of these victims tend to present to hospitals or urgent care clinics because they can get in and they can get out. So some of the red flags that that's in the literature really talks about that inconsistent history. Is this an individual that maybe has delays in care? Maybe they're telling you one thing and they're telling the triage person something different, or their story is not adding up. Maybe, in the hospital, I worked in the ED, and they would say that they're hospital hopping. Is this someone that doesn't really know where they are because they've been in New Hampshire one week and now they're in Atlanta because they've been, moved. So maybe they really don't know where they are. Is this someone that avoids eye contact? Are they presenting with someone that's kind of controlling the dialogue? They don't seem to be in control of anything that's going on. Do they appear fearful, anxious? Are they on the phone quite frequently? Are they, just really disassociated, not really engaged in the conversation that you and them are having? Is this someone that's coming in with multiple, having multiple sexual partners, coming in frequently for STDs or urinary tract infections? Other things like, is this someone that's also coming in with things like abdominal pain, and you keep doing the workup and everything comes back negative and you can't find a cause? And I challenge individuals to think outside the box. Could there be something else going on? And are they making references to the life? Are they dressed inappropriate? Are they presenting with someone that's older than them? Or are they or is this person kind of refusing to leave the room? Seems like they can't get away. Those are some of the patterns. And if you're thinking about, school age kids, maybe, is this someone that does have, multiple sex partners? If you're a school nurse, is there an academic decline? Are they visiting your office more frequently? Are they avoiding school? Are they truant a lot? So those are some patterns to look for. So when we talk about physical consequences, the most common things would be torture or, fractures, burns, tears, stabbings. Oftentimes, these individuals have a lot of chronic back pain, visual issues, hearing problems. If it's someone that's oftentimes been labor trafficked, they may have a lot of skin or respiratory problems because they're often exposed to agriculture or other chemicals. Oftentimes other infectious diseases, especially if we're saying, this is an individual that's been told that they need to sleep in a room with 6 or 10 individuals. Then you start thinking about tuberculosis and hepatitis and all these unsanitary environments, limited ventilation. Right? Even when you're thinking about COVID, there will be a high transmission of that if they're in these overcrowded, unsanitary situations. And oftentimes, victims are not necessarily going to report that, especially if that's going to impact the financial gain that they can send back to their family. Untreated chronic illnesses, victims of trafficking are not immune to other chronic issues like heart disease and hypertension and multiple sclerosis, diabetes. So you will see these individuals, even if they're not presenting or even if you're not suspecting trafficking, because that's not the complaint that they're coming in with, really getting that good history will help to navigate or kind of put you on the pathway to really expanding, your questioning. And just like I said, for me, I always tell providers, go with their gut. If something doesn't add up, if that history doesn't add up, and there seems to be more to the story, then try to explore that a little bit more. Other consequences, a lot of pregnancies, there's been a lot of abortions reported. One of the things that struck me as just terrible, that traffickers often have these victims stick cotton in their vaginal area to hide menstruation so they can continue to keep working. So oftentimes there's a lot of, infections or pelvic pain, just a lot of physical, and reproductive damage. And then, of course, the psychological consequences. When I talked about coming in frequently for one complaint, the workup being done and being completely ruled out, we call those somatic complaints. And then, of course, a lot of PTSD, a lot of trauma, depression, a lot of self-hate, oftentimes a lot of shame, difficulty forming relationships. So for a healthcare provider, you're taking care of a patient and you may like, why aren't they opening up to me? Why don't they trust me? Oftentimes, everyone that says that they love them and they should trust them along the way has really hurt them or did something really horrific to them. So it's going to be hard developing a relationship with you, and especially if there is that Stockholm syndrome and that trauma bonding. And then, of course, a lot of anxiety. And then, of course, we have to consider the substance abuse and all the previous trauma that this individual may have faced. Sometimes I've heard from different survivors who have spoke, oftentimes the trauma that they're really trying to escape from has been like that betrayal or that trauma when they were abused as a child. So oftentimes a lot of that trauma needs to be addressed before you can even start kind of like peeling back the layers and really trying to give them medical care. But there's a lot of self-hatred, a lot of shame with that. And then oftentimes eating disorders. Okay, so I just wanted to give a quick case study and then we can have individuals weigh in at the end if you like. But you have Patty here. She's 25 years old. She's coming in with dizziness, gait instability, having trouble walking essentially. She's having nausea and abdominal pain. She's accompanied by a man that identifies himself as her friend. She appears very unkempt and reports she has been sick for days. working very long hours. She has a history of traumatic brain injury, but in questioning, she's very vague about the details of what happened, when did this happen, so you can't really get a good history from that. She tells you she's got migraines since childhood. She's had about 3 abortions. She's had an appendectomy. She's got baseline anxiety and depression. So when you think, so then in terms of your social history, she's saying that my housing is unstable. I'm between houses right now, staying with a friend. She reports that her symptoms started about a week ago. She does not have any health insurance. She was not able to seek care at the time. However, her symptoms have become worse, and that's why she's here today. Her friend chimes in most of the information. In the interview, at times she appears very anxious. She starts vomiting. So you ask her friend to leave as a way to really gain more understanding about what's going on. At first, he is very reluctant and then whispers something in her ear. And after a few minutes, he heads to the waiting room. Do you see any potential risk factors or red flags? And I can open this up to question now, or I can wait till the end.
Well, Dr. Celia, we're running out of time a little bit, so
Okay.
why don't you?
So yeah, it's both in this situation and just in general for folks here that might be, in a situation where they're present with youth or as a school nurse or in that sort of role. What might be some of the things that people might take away as like an immediate blinking red flag? This is something we really need to key in on.
And I'll just go to the next slide and then I'll stop. So then just really basic here, after reviewing a couple different research articles, these were the questions that we found that was really helpful to identifying victims. These were survivors rated questions. So I will send access to the PowerPoint. And this is just a basic overview. This is a little framework in terms of, the protocol for healthcare systems. I will attach that as well, but it's essentially you consider red flags and then what are your next step. So you can wait for questions on that. Okay.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Any questions out here?
Are there any questions that anyone has for Dr. Mcintosh? I see a lot of shaking heads. Looks like people are pretty satisfied with this information. I think it's really helpful and a lot of really applicable takeaways. And certainly having PowerPoint and kind of more information to read further is going to be absolutely super helpful.
Dr. Celia, could we get a copy of that PowerPoint for the folks?
Yes, I can send it out.
Okay. All right. So
Can I make one comment? I'm sorry. This is Jenny. Are there a lot of healthcare providers in the audience?
Jen, for some reason you're coming up broken up.
Okay, I'm sorry. I can write it in the chat.
I can relay that. That's fine.
Yes, that's fine.
Okay.
Yep. Do you have it?
Yeah, okay. Sure.
Well, my name's Jake. I work with the sheriff's office. I think Dr. Celia said it, so let's grab lunch and then we're good for the day. So
Yeah, no,
I
we
think
want
she
to hear
pretty much
you.
covered the whole thing, so I think we're good. I did a little presentation. I'll have to admit, I don't know anything about Wyoming County. Okay, so I don't know too much about what goes on here or anything like that. But from Chautauqua County, I can let you guys know what we see in Chautauqua County. So I had a presentation. I'm going to have Scott pull up kind of the presentation that I teach when I'm at the academy. We're not going to go through the whole thing, but like Dr. Mcintosh did a really good job putting that together. But I want to take a minute and just make sure everyone understands the issue of human trafficking as an umbrella covering labor trafficking and sex trafficking, okay? Because when you look in the New York State penal law, there's not a crime for human trafficking. There's crimes for labor or sex trafficking. And we're seeing it's two big differences of the crime, okay? So just so I can gauge what my audience is there any CPS workers in here? Okay, I know we have law enforcement. What else do we have? Like where's everybody from?
I'm a school counselor.
Okay, so we got school, mental health through Wyoming County. Okay.
Early intervention.
Okay. Anybody else? Nobody else works with kids here or anything like that?
On Zoom there is.
Zoom there is, okay.
And the district attorney is on and some other folks from the schools, the
Okay,
superintendents.
all right. So that's my information. If we think about something after this presentation's over, you guys can shoot me a message, I guess at the end. We'll put my information up there, but just so you see, that's my name. I want to go over the difference too, because human trafficking became like a really hot button topic, like what, a year ago? It was in the news, it was mainstream media, everyone was talking about this stuff. And there was a big like misunderstanding of what human trafficking actually was, okay? So can we go down to slide 6 there, Scott? Okay. Like I constitute human trafficking as like soul stealing. You steal someone's soul. If you look into the eyes of someone who's been trafficked, they've just gone through so much of just a traumatic experience that we really have to work with these victims extra hard. Another thing that I do special victims cases, okay? Especially with kids that have been raped, abused, assaulted, stuff like that. Those are difficult cases to deal with, okay? And I give like a disclosure, okay? Some of the language I use might be difficult, but that's because this is a difficult topic, okay? I'm not a big swear word person or anything like that, but sometimes when we refer to certain things, we're gonna refer as how it is in the trafficking world, okay? But when we talk about the difference between human trafficking and human smuggling on the next slide, I want people to understand the smuggling of someone is going to be coming in over an international line, okay? Canada to the United States, Mexico to the United States, okay? You don't smuggle someone within these United States, okay? That's not what happens, all right? The unlawful entry into our country and them paying someone to bring them into the country, okay? That is going to be your human smuggling, the illegal entry. But the human trafficking within, okay, follows the guidelines of the force, fraud, or coercion that Dr. Mcintosh talked about, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But the force, fraud, or coercion that a trafficker uses to make a third party do something that they really don't want to do. Go down to, try the next slide there. So I know a lot of the times we're going to talk about kids, right? In Chautauqua County, we see, especially like in the city of Jamestown, it can be very depressed in some areas and very poor in some areas, okay? And what do we know about kids that are in our school system today? One thing they want to do is they just want to fit in, okay? I don't think you're going to be hard pressed to find a kid that says, I don't really want to fit in, or I don't want to have friends or anything like that, or yeah, I like getting picked on. Like that's not the case, all right? So these traffickers, they're really manipulative and charismatic people. They're easy to get along with, they're easy to relate to, but that's because they know what they're doing. They know who their audience is, and they know who they have to get to do the jobs for them, because they're not going to do it. They're going to have someone else do it, all right? So when we see like a 15-year-old kid who comes from a very, very poor family and they can't get the Nike shoes that the other kids do, the trafficker will understand that and will pay for these shoes for these kids to have, just for them to be able to do something in return for the trafficker, all right? You're always going to have a trafficker exploit a person for what they need, okay? Food, shelter, clothing, anything like that. Drugs is another one, okay? We see that with our adults in Chautauqua County. We see a lot of adults that have drug problems, that the trafficker will hone in on, okay? And maybe just start supplying them offhand to get them hooked on it. But then after that, in order for that person to feel like they can survive, because I don't know if anybody's gone through withdrawal here, right? But it's a nasty thing. Like, I've seen people go through it. It's awful. So when they keep supplying these people to the point where they just are dependent on the trafficker for those drugs, the trafficker will pull those drugs back and say, "Nuh-uh, you're not getting this right now. This is what you need to do now." So we see a lot of that with our adults, and it's a little more difficult with kids, because if a kid's, you know, hooked on drugs, there's a lot more services involved in that, all right? School systems involved, CPS is involved, all right? Law enforcement gets involved right away. So that's something that we obviously look out for. And then the physical part of it, right? We think about the extreme part, the physical part of forcing someone to do something that they don't want to do. Go to the next one, Scott. That's kind of a case example. A 16-year-old girl was forced to take cocaine, and then told her in order to get her next fix, after she got hooked on heroin and cocaine, she needed to have sex for the money. She does the act, the sex happens, the trafficker gets the money, a third party gets the money for her doing the work, all right? I need you to see the separation there, and the separation between prostitution and trafficking, okay? While prostitution still is illegal in the state of New York, it's a B misdemeanor, okay? That person, that prostitute, is going to, most of the time, keep the money for themselves. Still illegal, but they're in business for themselves. Where trafficking comes into play is when that person doing the service of sex has to then give all the money over to the trafficker. You can't consent to being trafficked. No one can consent to being trafficked, all right? That's a crime that happens, and the victim cannot consent to that. I need everybody to understand that, okay? And in the federal guidelines for it, like Dr. Mcintosh said, anyone under the age of 18, it automatically becomes federal guidelines for sex trafficking and labor trafficking. All right. We can go to the next one, Scott. The fraud is in there. This one was something out of New York State. But when we see fraud in there, we see a lot of labor trafficking stuff in there too. Come here, work in this country, you'll get this, that, and that, good housing, good pay. They come here, they have to pay for what would cost like a couple $100 bus ticket up from Mexico. They have to pay a couple $1,000s. They have to live in a house full of like 8 people, it's 4-bedroom house, and they have to pay for that. They have to pay for their cell phone bill to the trafficker. They have to pay for rides to work from the trafficker. Their wages get garnished sometimes by the trafficker. So if they think that they're gonna come here a lot of times into this country, sometimes illegally, to get work over here, that's not gonna happen. And I think Dr. Mcintosh said that too. And then the next one, when we see the coercion, okay? If any of us, work with CPS or whatnot, a lot of times traffickers, when they traffic single mothers or just mothers of children, right? They'll say, keep doing what I'm telling you to do, or else I'm going to family court and I'm going to tell them you're a drug addict, or you're out there, having sex on the street. You can't take care of your kid. And what's a mother going to do, right? A mother's put in a situation that she has to fight for her kid. She's going to do at that time what she thinks is best to fight for her kid. I need you guys to understand this too. Most of these victims, these trafficking victims, have checkered past, okay? They have drug arrests, they have criminal arrests, mental health issues, don't come from a good home. Like, these are not people that are just out doing a 9-to-5 job, all right? These are people that have checkered past, but that's what the trafficker wants. That's what the trafficker wants, the people with the less credibility, that if they come forward, no one's going to believe them, all right? I can't tell you how many times when someone comes forward to want to report being a victim of human trafficking that they say, you're never going to believe me, or this sounds really crazy, and then you're never going to believe me. Because it is. It's really bizarre. It's a bizarre crime. trafficking itself is really hard for us to get our mind wrapped around of what it actually is. I grew up in a very sheltered life growing up. I had two extremely good parents, and they kept me from like any sort of that, you know, like that world or understanding of that world. But when you grow up in that kind of world and you're in the system, who are you going to believe? Are you going to believe the girl that's strung out on drugs, that has an awful criminal history, and is just downright mean? Or are you going to believe this nice guy that comes up and says, "Officer, I'm really sorry. Like, I'm so sorry for the way that she acted. She's got drug problems. She has mental health problems. I'll take her home. Like, I'm sorry. I apologize for this." These guys know how to act. These traffickers know how to act. And we need to be aware of that. We need to look for the red flags on what's going on with these people, because it is an underlying issue, and we're only scratching the surface a lot of times. Let's go down a couple more. Keep going. So, we'll talk about labor trafficking here in a little bit, but I kind of want to stay on the sex trafficking part of it. So can we go down a little more, Scott? A little more, a little more. We'll go down a little more. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. All right. This is a graph that shows if we don't, especially with kids, if we don't intercede in this step right here, this step, especially with a child, if they fall down to here, it's extremely hard to get back from. A lot of times, maybe if we get a criminal element out of it, like a trafficking victim gets arrested for something, then maybe they might start cooperating. And I'm not saying that every kid that gets abused is going to fall into this, but if we don't do some sort of intervention, if child advocacy center is not involved, or if counseling is not involved, and that kid just has to deal with it by themselves, or continues to stay in that environment where they can't thrive like a normal kid can, they're gonna fall down to here, right? And that's dangerous, because when we have kids in school that are constantly involved with a trafficker is going to get that kid to recruit other kids, all right? And then we see when that happens, when we start seeing recruiting of other kids from a girl or a kid who was once a victim and now is down here as a perpetrator, and a lot of times those girls that are recruiters or are like the right-hand person for the trafficker, they're called like a bottom girl or a bottom bitch, right? They're the right-hand person. They're the ones that are going to be supplying the trafficker with new girls, or enforcing these girls to stay in line, or the ears for the trafficker for what's going on. And then at the very bottom, we just see a constant cycle of a constant life and addiction, and what we have with these victims of trafficking. Scott, let's keep going down. Open up the Wyoming presentation, would you? Next one. Next presentation.
The Wyoming one or the other? That is the Wyoming presentation.
Can you open it back up? There you go.
Sorry. Oh, this is your Wyoming presentation.
No, that's the Academy one. You can X out of the other one and just open the Wyoming one.
Oh, you're right. I'm so sorry.
I like that visualization on the slide 26, where it shows that progression
Yeah.
of somebody who's already coming from space where they have vulnerabilities, they have risks, And then it sort of is escalating, into a place where there are opportunities to intervene, but then it does become more difficult.
Yeah. So the trafficking aspect in itself is a very lucrative business, okay? And the trafficker can operate almost at like a plausible deniability aspect of it, right? Like saying the victim's doing what they want to do. If the trafficker gets wrapped up in it, right? He'll say that person's doing what they want to do. I'm not forcing them to do it. Talk to them about it. Talk to them about the prostitution. I'm not forcing them to do it. It's different than me doing a pat down of a guy and getting a gun off him and him saying, oh, these aren't my pants. Come on, dude. Like, these are your pants. You put them on. Like, you got the gun in your waistband. Like, how are you going to tell me that these aren't your pants? That's hard to beat. It's not as hard to beat when someone says, I don't know, I wasn't with her when she was doing that. Go talk to her, right? So there's a deniability aspect in there where you really have to have like a rapport with the victim of trafficking to be able to say, talk to me about this, like what's going on? Because we do, a lot of times, I'm not saying all the time, but a lot of times we need the cooperation from that victim in order to go forward with a lot of these cases. Can we go down to the next one, Scott? And then can we pull that up in display mode or not? Oh, that's fine, that's all screen. That's fine. So I say, can everyone see that back there? I know it's hard to see, but if you want, you can come up here because I do want you guys to see this. People think that the drug game is where you like make a lot of the money, okay? It is, like if you do it well, you can make some good money. Bear with me because these are pre-COVID prices on these drug activities, so bear with me on this. But if you buy drug X for $20,000 a kilo, you're buying it, right? That's your money. That's your $20,000 coming out of your pocket to purchase that drug, okay? You cut the drug to make the 2 kilos and you sell it for 40 kilos, your profit's gonna be $20,000, right? Once the drug is gone, you gotta start over again. You gotta find the money. Sometimes maybe you can go on credit. That's a dangerous, that's a dangerous game that you're playing. But a lot of times, pay the supplier the money, you get the drugs, do with it after that, right? But in the world of sex trafficking, right? If you get a victim, you don't have to pay for that victim. You just have to manipulate that victim. You have to exploit that victim for their weaknesses. You don't need to buy them. That's just not the business that these people are in. They can do it 2 ways. And I think Jen does this really well, but it's either, I call it like guerrilla style pimp or Romeo style. You're gonna do it forcefully, or you're gonna be charismatic and you're gonna be like, baby girl, I love you, come with me, do this for me. I need this, or I have a drug problem, help me out with my drug problem. They're gonna play on that person's emotion, okay? Opportunistic or forceful. You see these 2 in there, all right? But that's how they get their victims. That's initially how you get your victim. So let's just say a trafficker sells that person for 6 times a day, $50 per time. That's a low price, okay? If you put a kid in there, like a really young kid, people are gonna pay more for that because you gotta be extra careful about that, all right? They don't want that getting out that, you're doing it with, you're having sex with like an 8-year-old or something like that, right? Because what you need then, right, is someone to be confidential. You need the trafficker to be confidential, you need the supplier of the kid to be confidential, or the mom to be confidential, so that buyer, that John, will probably pay a little more money to make sure that flow keeps coming and everybody keeps quiet about the activity that's going on. So we'll say that's $300, right? And 6 days a week, $1,800. And then 50 weeks out of the year, like get some days off or whatnot, maybe they can't do it every day, $90,000, we'll say $20,000 for expenses. You're making a profit of $70,000 off of one victim. And that's not taxed, right? That's under the table. You're not having to pay anything on that. So just imagine if that trafficker had multiple victims, you'd be seeing a lot of money coming in. So it really is a lucrative business. And I think probably, like Dr. Mcintosh said, the supply and demand is there. So we see a lot of that where people have these things, these wants. And there's people out there who will meet these wants or these needs. And there's no morals that won't be broken for people for money.
Even in the rural areas.
Even in the rural areas. So that's great. Yeah. So let's talk about that. You don't need a city to have this to happen. Okay. Well, with the way that social media is now, a lot of times, I think Dr. Mcintosh said, a lot of times kids get exploited online. Snapchat, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, like that. A lot of kids get exploited on that. And I've seen it time and time again. But it doesn't take much to post stuff online for meetup places. And like in call and out call, okay? When escorts say in call, you're coming into their house. When you're out call, they're coming out to you. They'll meet you someplace, car, hotel, park, whatever. Like they can post these things online and be able to do that. And if for the mothers in here, if you think that the world's not dark enough for parents that have drug issues or whatnot to pimp their own kids out, you're dead wrong. Okay, because it happens. All right, and it's awful, but it happens. Don't need a city for this to happen. Who go to that next one, Scott? Through Safe Harbor and Chautauqua County, as of the beginning of this year, 2020 was a busy year for this, so obviously these stats are up. But at least 15 youth have met the federal definition at being trafficked for the purposes of sex. All right. 2020, we saw a shot. I don't know why. I mean, 2020 is one of these years that I think we all like to forget. But we saw a shot, and that's what you can see kind of as of January of last year, what we had in Chautauqua County. When we first got really into this and started monitoring trafficking within our county, the sheriff's office, along with Safe Harbor and the Child Advocacy Program, tried to push an initiative to get more awareness out there, more public awareness for people to understand what human trafficking actually is, because it's people like school administrators or child protection services or mental health counselors that talk to these people, because there's a huge distrust in law enforcement, right? Like, we can't do it alone. People don't like to necessarily talk to the cops about this stuff, but it's the people out there that do these things and work services with these people that are eyes and ears. So we thought we need to make a frontline referral process for these service providers. And if Scott goes to the next slide, you're going to see a poster that we put out last year that tells what trafficking is, right? All the law enforcement agencies got on board with this in Chautauqua County, and everywhere from state police all the way down to the local PD that had like 3 guys in it. Okay, everybody was on the same page. We're all fighting against human trafficking. We're all going to combat this, and we believe the victims. We're going to try to do this all together. So what we created is we created a toll-free number and an email that comes directly to the sheriff's office, and people that want to report human trafficking, tips of human trafficking, questions about human trafficking. We really pushed an initiative for the public to become more aware and to just ask general questions so they can get educated on what human trafficking is too. And we've seen a really good outcome with that, of people just have that open line communication. And that's really what made our numbers jack up, is people being aware of what's going on. And then, Jen, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me any better now?
Yep.
That's better, yeah.
I don't know.
Okay, good.
I don't know if you wanted to go on the labor trafficking part of it.
Sure. I mean, labor trafficking is not much different. I mean, the elements are all the same. You're just in a different scenario. Do you have slides for it?
Yeah, if you want to go on the next one, Scott.
Okay. So a lot of the labor trafficking that I believe the audience is going to come in contact is going to be on the farms. And there's still violence, there's still, you know, threats, everything that you would see in a sex trafficking case. Oftentimes with labor trafficking, I would say almost always though, one difference is that a lot of times these are going to be individuals from a different country. They're going to be individuals that do not have the proper documentation to be in the US, which adds another element of vulnerability for them and something that traffickers can exploit. The threat of deportation being turned into to law enforcement is the number one form of coercion for these labor traffickers. Oftentimes too, what's going to happen is, let's say they're in, and we, you know, in like Jake's Chautauqua County, there's a lot of Guatemalans. They're going to be recruited in Guatemala and provided with, you know, a song and dance to come here and you know, make a lot of money that they can then send back to their families to help them. They're told they're going to make, let's just say, you know, $2,000 a month. They agree. Typically, there's a fee. There's a, you know, a smuggling fee, so to speak, that they do have to pay back. So they get to the border. They make it to the U.S. They end up, you know, they'll get to the trafficker, to the farm, and then they're told, well, you know, we told you the fee was going to be $5,000. Well, now it's $10,000. You know, for whatever reason, whatever they can make up. That's one of the aspects too that's different with labor trafficking is there's with this debt is whether or not, you know, we or, you know, law enforcement or whoever's talking to these people would perceive that as a real debt. They perceive it as a real debt. That's all that matters. And so now it's a $10,000 fee. They work their first month, let's just say, and this is very simplistic. They get their $2,000 and the trafficker's like, well, wait a minute, I need 1,000 of that back for rent. And I need 400 back for food and 200 back for clothing. And, you know, that trip to Walmart, that's $45, and the laundry detergent, and so on, and they're left with like $100. So it's going to take them an extremely long time to pay back $10,000. Like I said, that's very simplistic, but that's in essence how it happens. You know, I've worked cases too. A lot of times these people will then threaten the family members in Guatemala or whatever country they're coming from. And that is a lot of emotional stress and pressure on the people that are here trying to work. When they know that they can't leave, they are stuck where they are, or their family members are going to be killed. One thing that's important in labor cases too is also to recognize maybe some differences in, you know, in cultures, that type of thing. Is there what's the next slide, Jake? I'm sorry.
So for aspects of, I think I hit on it with the sex trafficking victims. The basic mistrust in law enforcement is huge. I know I mentioned that before. It's the same with the labor trafficking side of it. I knew this guy that worked out Midwest on human trafficking. That was like his specialized job. And there was an issue where there was this massage parlor out in a complex, and a cop, just a beat cop, would go out, sit in the parking lot, do his paperwork, and the madam or the trafficker who was running the massage parlor, would come out every day to talk to him to say, thank you for your service, really appreciate you, we love law enforcement, offers them a bottle of water, they have communication. She comes back into the massage parlor. Well, what she does beforehand is she gets all the girls from the massage parlor and has them stand at the window so they can see her go to the police car, have an interaction with the cop, come back in and say, you see that? He's on my team. And if you try to leave, you're going to get arrested or you're going to get deported or something bad's going to happen to you. Because a lot of these people coming from other countries, you know, their perception of law enforcement is like where they came from. And of course, I'm biased. I think we have great law enforcement here in the United States. But sometimes when you go to other countries, it may not be as great. So when they see that interaction and that trafficker is constantly, you know, pounding that into the brain, what are they going to believe? They're going to believe the trafficker. So that mistrust of law enforcement, that fear of coming forward for the unknown, because the trafficker will say, like, I know the laws. I've been here longer than you have. Listen to me. Do what I tell you to do. You'll come out of this eventually, which it's very hard to get out of debt like that. And a lot of times you just don't get out of debt like that. But especially when we do the labor trafficking stuff, it just adds a whole new element of distrust, not because of, you know, fear of being arrested. I mean, that's one of them, but fear for your family back home and fear for your life here, your family's life here. So we have hurdles that we need to overcome with that stuff. And like people like you that sometimes can bridge that gap between us and them is huge, because we need that. Sometimes it's hard just to come in full force as a law enforcement aspect of it.
Jake or Jennifer, I mean, do we also have to think about the folks coming in, working on the farms that, I mean, do they have children? I mean, do those children come into play with this or not really?
Jen, you want to take that one?
Yes, they definitely do. Sometimes, a lot of times, the children, they're out working with them. I mean, I have a case I can't talk too specific about, but our subject actually began to take advantage of the teenage daughter of one of his victims. I mean, kidnapped her twice. And, you know, we believe he sexually exploited her, but she has not disclosed that yet. So we're still hoping that's going to come to fruition. But yeah, kids, a lot of times the family members will bring their oldest child with them. And, you know, sometimes they do go to school, though. They do enroll them in school and that. But, you know, sometimes, you know, summers and breaks, the kids are working on the farms with their parents.
The next one's good.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is it the farmers that are employing these traffickers or the farmers? And then my second question is, if not, farmers know that this is
Right. So, Jen, correct me if I'm wrong on this. The question was, are the farmers employing the traffickers to bring these people in, right?
Yeah.
And then, or do the farm owners know about this illegal activity going on? You want me to go with that, or do you want to go with that?
I can answer it. I mean, you know, the farmers, they have a lot of plausible deniability. The trafficker is typically what we would call them a broker. So they're someone that the farms know they can reach out to get workers. And it's, you know, one of those, you know, I don't want to know, I'm not going to ask. He told me they had all their proper documentation. A lot of times, I mean, they're providing them with fake documentation. And, you know, it's hard for me to believe. It's hard for law enforcement. You know, when you're investigating the cases, it's hard to believe that the farmers don't know, but it's very, very difficult to prove.
The cases I've had down in Chautauqua County where somebody from another country, whether it be Mexico or Guatemala, El Salvador, exploited a kid, right? If that were to happen, and then I go to the farm owner and I say, provide me the documentation they provided you for employment here. Usually a good farm owner will try to get that documentation prior to them employing these people to work on the farm. But a lot of times the documents are fraudulent. So they're here in the country, they have a social security card or like a visa or green card or whatnot, but they're forged, they're illegal documents. So that happens quite frequently too, that when these people come over, they get these documents and so, yeah.
Right, and the farmers will pay, let's just say they pay, a lot of times they will write out checks to the victims in their names. You know, they give them to the broker or whoever they get it to. What they don't know is then the broker will take them all to the bank at the same time. They all cash them at the same time and then hand the money over to the broker / trafficker.
So a lot of times when we deal with victims too, like Jen was referring back to that other case with the daughter of the people who were here working for the trafficker. We're pretty sure that one element has happened of the exploitation of the kid, but she's not at that point to like talk about it yet. So just be mindful of that too. If you're working with kids specifically, bits and pieces will come out at times. All right. If anybody has had anything to do with like a forensic interview of a kid at the Child Advocacy Center, or has any court proceedings with kids who are victims and they have to testify or whatnot, sometimes just little bits at a time come out. And it's not because they're withholding information, it's because they really endured a traumatic experience and their brain sometimes can only handle so much of that. So once they're involved in a safe area and counseling and good people surrounding them, that's when they start to feel more comfortable and start disclosing a little more about what happened to them. So just be aware of that, anybody that works with children in these kinds of areas. One more step. And then as Jen talked about, these are some of the areas for labor trafficking that you might see some people employed in. I think specifically in Chautauqua County, it's going to be, farms and restaurants are going to be the two huge ones. I'm assuming out here in Wyoming County, your big one's probably going to be farms. Like I'm sure that I drove here, it took me 2 hours to get here. I drove through a lot of farmland to get here. So I know that there's a lot of job opportunities out here for people that want to do that kind of work. So just be, mindful of that too with the jobs with that. So Scott, can you go to the next one? Real fast, that's my information. If anybody has any questions or anything like that, please, email me, give me a call, trafficking issues or whatnot. If I don't know the answer, I'll ask Jen because she always knows the answer, and then we'll work through it from there. So,
Jake, could we get a copy of the PowerPoint? Is that possible?
I could probably send you.
Okay.
Send you a copy of it.
Yeah. Maybe get back,
Yep. Yeah.
doctor it up.
Yep. Absolutely.
I know, Jen, I know you're there. I mean, what else do you have to add? I mean, I've heard so many people talk about your experience. And, the folks here maybe giving us an idea of what we can look for. And you've been doing it so long, it's natural for you.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that, so I do a lot of trainings, in particular, I mean, obviously I'm in, law enforcement, but these cases are not, like Dr. Mcintosh mentioned, people do not knock on the door. It's pretty rare. I've had it happen, but they say, I'm a victim of human trafficking. I need help. This is a type of crime that you have to seek out, for lack of a better word. And And you really have to have people working it that understand it and that have patience. These cases are very frustrating. It is, you know, Jake and I have a case we're working right now where our main victim is on her 3rd round of rehab. And we believe her. We believe what she has told us. We have evidence to back up what she has said, but you know, she has left rehab a few times, so it's difficult. We can't move forward with the case until we get her in a place where she can testify in the grand jury. So, you know, it's difficult because I think a lot of people would have just given up probably after the first time. But, you know, these kind of cases they're difficult, and the drug usage and the drugs as a method of control by traffickers has increased so much in the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years. I mean, so much more. When I started doing this a long time ago, the pimps didn't want the girls using drugs. They would get in trouble if they used drugs. That meant less money for the pimps in their pockets. And that's really all they care about. It is still all they care about, but the drugs have become such a form of control. I have a case involving a pimp. I mean, 4 of my victims that they're dead. They overdosed. There's, you know, it's an extremely difficult hurdle to overcome in these cases.
And Jen, along those lines, one of the presentations I've seen you do over the years is that one, A Tale of Two Pimps. And I wondered if you were going to share any content from those cases, just as like a window into what those situations were like.
Yep. So the one and then Jake had mentioned the difference between like a guerrilla pimp and a Romeo pimp, as we would call them. So a guerrilla pimp, I mean, really their main method of control is going to be just brute force, beatings, and I mean, don't get me wrong, they're still charismatic. I mean, these cases are a lot of times, like someone had mentioned, I think Dr. Mcintosh, you know, they can present as a domestic violence, you know, case. But like in the case that I had, the subject, his name was Kenneth White. I mean, we had instances where with his bottom, I mean, the medical records we had on her were, I don't know, like probably 5 to 6 inches thick. And so many times she had gone to the emergency room with cigarette burns to her genitals. I mean, footprints on her back. I mean, there's documentation of all these things in these records. And, you know, that was how he controlled her. And she actually ended up perpetrating violence on some of the girls at his direction, and she was also, you know, the bottom girl a lot of times, and which was the case in this investigation, there was always the beatdown. So the beatdown of her in front of a new girl, basically to get them to comply with whatever he wanted them to do. And it scared the crap out of these girls, I can tell you. Every one of them saw it, every one of them experienced it, and they did not want it to happen to them. White, he broke the neck. He killed a dog, a puppy of one of the victims. The puppy had peed in a hotel room that they were staying in. He found out, came to the hotel, and just snapped the dog's neck. He was extremely, extremely violent. You know, that case took a very long time to do that. I mean, it took a couple years for multiple reasons. These cases, they, you know, in the federal system, things go very slow anyways. But, you know, we ended up, I think, with eight victims in that case. And then you had the opposite somewhat approach. we had a pimp named Tommy Cox. And also too, just for like Kenneth White, like his Facebook page, all family oriented. You never would have looked at his Facebook and thought, oh yeah, this guy's a pimp. Never, ever. He had like a side business where he would buy houses and, you know, he would fix them up and flip them. And then there was Tommy Cox. Now, Tommy Cox's father was a pimp. His grandfather was a pimp. His family was involved with him at the time. His grandmother helped him a lot. Now Tommy had tattoos on his face. One above one eye that said "all on a bitch," and then another one that said PGO, which means pimping going on. And you know, we said that was like some of our best evidence. His face, like he was all about the life. His Facebook page was all about the life. Pictures of him with money and girls holding money, giving him money, kissing his feet, just, you know, all kinds of memes that were all about prostitution and pimping. He traveled the country. He was a cross-country pimp, you know, meaning, which he took great pride in. I think he was very proud of the fact that he had been to 37 states. He was very well known. He would buy a car, go to an auction, you just buy the car with cash, drive it until it died or something happened, and then he would just abandon it and then go buy another car. That was his life, and he recruited girls along the way. Tommy, we were fine. Tommy, the Cox case was difficult because he wasn't here. A lot of times Buffalo was always his home base, but he would travel so much. But we knew where he was from his Facebook page. We ended up getting lucky, for lack of a better word, that he had recruited a girl out in California, and brought her back to Buffalo. Pimping her out all the way across the country. And when she got here to Buffalo, he went to his father's house. Like I said, his father was a very well-known pimp. And she wasn't dressed right, or she wouldn't put makeup, she didn't have makeup on. He got mad at her and basically turned her out onto Grant Street, which is like the stroll or the track or the strand, whatever you want to refer to it, where the prostitutes walk. And she saw a news van and ran up to them and asked them for help, to call 911. So, unfortunately, in the presentation, I have the 911 call. It's very good. It's a very good call. So, there we had that. That was great evidence. She didn't know where she was. She had no idea. She asked for help, and luckily, they got her to a shelter, and the information got back to my partner and I, and we were able to talk to her. She ended up being one of the named victims, charged victims in our case. Shortly thereafter, we had, it was like this kind of the same circumstance, but this was a minor. Now he had recruited her in North Carolina, brought her up to Buffalo. Same thing. He got mad at her for actually, you know what? I think she left. She was at the father's house again, and somehow she was able to escape and get out the door. She calls her mother, who three-way calls 911. Mom says, "Look, I think my daughter's a victim of human trafficking." And now this girl is hiding in a bush, and she's scared to death. Talking to the 911 dispatcher is like, "Well, I need to know where you are. Where are you?" And she's like, I'm too afraid, like I'm hiding. I don't want to, she's afraid to even come out. Look, they do end up finding her. And again, we get in touch with her. She ends up testifying for us, and she's another victim. Now she's a minor, which was, that kind of ups the ante, so to speak. And we were able to get that 911 call and all that. That's very great evidence. Cox ended up getting arrested in New York City, and he did not get bonded out. We knew where he was. We were able to quickly get an indictment for him and just had him brought up here. So they're both in jail for a long time. But Cox was very, very charismatic. I mean, my two counterparts that actually transported him from New York, I mean, jokingly, but they were like, what do you have against this guy? Like, he's funny, he's, and he is. We met him, we proffered him, and he was, I mean, I can see why he could easily, get these women to do what he wanted. But he was also very violent. I mean, a lot of beatings, but his approach was more very charismatic. He recruited on Facebook because we did a search warrant for his Facebook messages, and I can't even tell you how many. He would just send out the words, "You ready?" It was kind of a joke to us for a long time. You ready? And let's just say he does that to 100 girls in one day. 98 of them are going to be like, "Screw you, you're nuts, don't talk to me again." But then there's 2 of them that are like, "Oh, ready for what? To make that money." And then he starts, selling them the bill of goods. So
Jen, we still want to hear from Deb Kuehner, who runs the Potter's Hand Foundation, but I want to give the crowd a chance if anybody has a question, or any of you on Zoom want to type in to Scott and he can read it out. Is there anybody here that, would like to ask something they've been thinking about to Jake or Jen? There's only about, 15 of us here, so anything?
There is one thing I do want to say, that I like to always talk about this, and this kind of goes with, Jake has mentioned too, that a lot of times these victims they're not ready to talk to you. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to someone, I know they're lying to me, I know they're a victim of human trafficking, but they're not there. Whatever it may be, that has to be their, quote, rock bottom to get them to want to cooperate with law enforcement. They're not there. So what I did is I had business cards made up of, with my name on it, just my first name, but like a nail salon or a hair salon, tattoos, something that could be given to either males or females. And I always had my cell phone on it, and I just was very honest with them, and just said, "Look, I know you're lying to me, but you're good. There's one day you're going to get hit one too many times, or something's going to happen, and you're going to call me." And I give them that card, and they keep that card. They're not going to keep an FBI card, right? I mean, if someone sees that, they're probably going to get the crap beat out of them. But they keep those cards, and 3 months later they'll call me. And they had worked many, many times in my, 20 plus years of doing these cases. So that's one piece of advice I like to give, in particular with law enforcement. It really works. And that person will call you when they're ready.
Yeah, good.
Anybody else? Is there anyone?
There was one question that Bethany Hank from Warsaw Elementary School asked. Dr. Celia, I think, might have responded privately to her. She asked, what are some of the warning signs schools can look for in our students when trying to distinguish between migrant work and labor trafficking? Were you able to hear me?
You mean from from the students?
Yes, I believe that's what she was asking from. She's from our local elementary school.
I mean, are they missing school a lot? If they are, try to find out where they were. A lot of times too, one thing that we see is these people will live in these apartments that are, quote, and I'm, using air quotes, provided for them. And these, this $500 a month apartment, there's 5 families living in there, and they're charging those families, each of those families, $1,000 a month. So instead, this $500 apartment becomes $5,000. So ask them, who do you live with? How many people do you live with? you know, do you have family in another country? Do you see them? Are you able to talk to them? You know, they're not going to have their passports like readily available. You know, the trafficker is going to hold on to those oftentimes. You know, that's, I would say more so what is going on with the, you know, the parents. What's the parent situation? You know, where does your mother work? That type of thing.
Well, thank you so much for coming on for us. I know things have changed for you, and COVID put you kind of stuck in your office instead of or home. Is that your home office?
No, this is my off-site office.
Well, there you go. So is Deb on?
Yes, I'm on.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good, good. So we've got a few minutes left here, and now we want to hear from you as a person that sees the other side. You actually end up working with the victims.
Sure. So we are a year-long residential program based out of the, obviously, Finger Lakes region, but we have women that come to us from all over the U.S. We're connected to Polaris Project and the National Trafficking Sheltered Alliance. So we have referrals that come through both of those places, but anyone can refer. So if you have an individual over the age of 18, they certainly can be referred to our program. I did put a link to our website in the chat earlier today, but then I had issues with my computer. I hope it's still there. But basically what we do is, you know, Jake said that these individuals have their soul stolen. And that is so true. You know, when they come to us, they have been through so much trauma. Most of the women that we work with, all but two have been addicts. One of the two was addicted to sex, but the other one really just didn't have an addiction. And their stories are all very different, but they all kind of deal with some of the same things. So, you know, I think about how they're lured. One young woman that we had come into our program, actually, she was our first ever resident. She was 12 years old, living in a shelter with her mother, and her mom was a heroin addict and wanted drugs, went to it was actually a pastor who ran the shelter, and went to him and asked for money and in exchange for sex. And he said, "I'd rather have sex with your daughter." So she sold her daughter at age 12 to this man to have sex. And that's a pretty familiar story for us. We've already heard a lot about the drug impact on trafficking, and for us, it's a real reality. So often these women, again, as Jen was saying, they don't even recognize themselves as victims. You know, they come in. We had one woman in our program who, she was raped, and that was kind of her motive for coming to us, because she found herself in a situation where she was high and she ended up getting raped. But when she got to us, she just didn't identify at first with some of the other women because of their, you know, trauma from early childhood. But she certainly had been trafficked, because there were people who were selling her for her drugs. And so she didn't necessarily, you know, she wasn't prostituting, she was getting something in return for the sex. The youngest resident that we've had in our program was 18 years old and up to 47 years old. So imagine being a 47-year-old woman who has lived an entire life of trauma and abuse and, you know, trafficking, and just trying to peel back those layers of trauma that they're dealing with. It's a very long and difficult process. So when they come to us, it's interesting, because we are very blessed. Our home is a 9,000 square foot brand new home that can house up to 12 women at a time, though we have found that 8's about the best max, because, you know, so much trauma in one place is difficult. But when they come in, you know, they're so grateful to be there, because they finally feel like they have a place that's safe. They don't necessarily trust us immediately. They have been through so many different things that it takes time for them to begin to trust that we're really there for them. I'd love to say that all of them stay for an entire year, but they don't. You know, they are so pulled back by things like the drug that they're trying to get away from. All of the people who come to our program actually have to pass a drug test before entering the program. The only thing that can be left in their system is marijuana because it takes so many days, because we are not a detox facility. So they have to go through some type of detox before they come. And once they arrive, you know, they're grateful. We start in with our programming. Our days are filled with classes and counseling sessions for them. But we also do fun things. You know, COVID has made it a little difficult for us to be able to get out and do things, but we do our best to be creative with what we can. As I said, addiction is the strongest pull. So we do a 12-step program with them. We do a class called Seeking Safety, which is the trauma-informed curriculum. We do a class on sexual abuse, which, you know, goes back into their childhood. I can tell you that almost all of our residents, I would say, gosh, 99% of them have had some kind of sexual trauma from an early age. And so we really work with them to kind of unbury that and get rid of, kind of not get rid of, but work through that trauma of early childhood sexual abuse. All of them experience PTSD, and they all have different triggers, you know, so it's kind of interesting sometimes, because we really try to work with them to come up with a set of coping skills that works for them, and it's all different. One individual that I have worked with since 2014, she actually got a job working with the Red Cross, and she was supposed to make phone calls for them. And every time she got on the phone, she would really fight hard not to say, well, we all know when we present or when we're talking, you know, we're saying, and the reason that that was such a trigger for her, if she was talking to a John on the phone and her trafficker heard her, he would beat her for it. And so she couldn't do the job because it was just too difficult. So it's crazy to think about things that are so ordinary for us that can be such a trigger for them. We teach classes on healthy boundaries. I think our 18-year-old struggled probably with that more than anybody else. She, you know, she had just a very charismatic personality herself. She was easily liked, and just really kind of, what's the word? You know, our staff had to be really cautious with her, because she really wanted to be loved, as we all do. And so she would manipulate to get what she needed. We also do a class on entitlement. It's interesting because when the women come into our program, you know, often they have been without for so long, anything that's their own, but they quickly can get into this mindset of, well, I'm a victim, so I deserve this. And we don't want them to live as victims. We want them to live as women who thrive. And so we work very hard to get them out of that entitlement mentality. You know, I remember walking into the house one day, and one of our residents, it was her turn to cook, and she had taken, I think it was like 10 huge steaks out of the freezer, and we had 5 residents at the time. And I was just like, what are you doing? What are you doing? And they were already thawing. And she's like, well, I want to make sure we have enough. She also, one time when she was making mac and cheese for dinner, took out 3 pounds of macaroni for the same number of women. And so it was just difficult. You know, she had been homeless and she wasn't used to having anything. And it was just that transition from her, that scarcity issue that she was dealing with, trying to help her understand that, you know, you can survive on less, and we're going to teach you how to do everything in moderation. One of our residents had severe trauma bonding. She came to the program believing that her pimp trafficker loved her and wanted, you know, she missed him. She wanted to be with him. She's not the only one. We actually had another individual who came to us. And this is interesting, Jen and Jake. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this before. I'm sure you probably have, but she had a relationship with a guy who was in jail. And he was actually her trafficker. So he would tell her, you know, you need to go out and do this, but you're going to send me the money. And she would send him the money because she was so desperate to be loved and cared for. So she met this guy, and that was, you know, he was the one that was, you know, taking everything from her. The other individual, the trauma bonding, it took several months before she believed that this guy really didn't love her, because that's not what love looks like. It just was very difficult for her to understand that. We have had women in our program who, obviously many of them come in suicidal or have had suicide attempts. Most of them have some kind of criminal record from, whether it's theft or prostitution, which sometimes we're able to work with them, with law enforcement and attorneys, to be able to expunge that record. And that's a good thing if we can do that. We've also had women in our care who have homicidal ideation and, have actually visualized how they were going to take a knife away from a staff member and use it to stab them in the back and kill them. It's interesting because you have such an array of women in one home who have gone through so many different things, but they all kind of have the same stuff that they need to work through. So one of the things that we're doing now is just trying to really kind of get an idea. We've only been open 3 years and we're learning all the time. But one of the things that we're trying to do now is to really cater our program to each individual and find out, even before they come, and we do this already, but what are your goals? What are your plans? What are your dreams? They can't even necessarily identify those things. Their immediate goal is to get away from the trafficker and to not have that kind of control over them. We had an individual come to our program last week. As soon as she got there, she wanted to leave. So you just don't know, how ready are they? That's probably one of our biggest struggles is determining before they come, before someone buys an airplane ticket or a bus ticket, are they really ready for healing? And that's the hardest part. One of the things that Jake said earlier too is that, they don't like law enforcement. Well, a lot of the women that we serve have told us that they have been forced into situations where they are having to have sex with someone who's wearing a uniform. And pimps know that if they can get women to fear, just like, I think it was Jen that you were saying, or Jake, I can't remember which one, talking about the woman who owned the massage parlor. That's a reality. These women are forced to have sex with not only law enforcement or people who are posing as law enforcement, but also as pastors. And then they believe they have nowhere to turn. They can't go to churches, they can't, doctors, whoever it is, they feel like they're not safe and they have nowhere to go for help. So the year-long program is designed for them to come in and get the counseling, these classes that we teach. We do codependency as well, but also sometimes family reunification, which is honestly one of my favorite things because they come in oftentimes with no one. We do a 30-day blackout period where they're not allowed to have contact with anyone just so they can settle in. And then we do an approved contact list. And it's sad to see how many of them have no one to put on that list, except maybe the person who ran the shelter they just came from. But over time, we're able to help them kind of process through, well, what about your grandmother? Do you have an aunt that, or an uncle or some family member? And I remember one woman very specifically, just recently, actually, she really believed she had no one in the world who was going to love her or be there for her. And by the time she left our program a year later, she had reunited with her mom, her sisters, and she was so excited to have those relationships back in her life. She chose to stay here because the state that she came from, she knew that if she went back to family, she would be vulnerable again. But she still has a vibrant relationship with her family members that is just something that, she never thought she could ever have again. So in addition to our classes, we kind of have our days set up for them to come in, and 9 to noon and 1 to 4, we do the classes. And then each person has, we do a chef of the week. Obviously we have staff support them in whatever, if they're not a cook or if they are a cook, then they get kind of the control of the kitchen. They can help with meal planning and menus. And that's just for dinner. Everybody kind of does their own thing for breakfast and lunch. And then obviously we do chores. And then in the evening, it's free time. We do 2 community support groups a week before COVID. Now we do online support groups. And then on the weekends, we just try to do fun things, whether we go, obviously not right now, but bowling, movies, hikes, which is pretty much what we did for fun this summer. We went on hikes, and sometimes we'd go through a drive-through. So it just definitely changed how things are done. But in addition to those classes that I mentioned, we also do job prep training where we help them create a resume. We do interview skills, just trying to get them ready for what's next. And then when they're ready to leave the program, we want to help them transition smoothly. So we're actually in the process of trying to buy another property that can be a transition home and a secondhand store. So, you know, we're just another fundraising opportunity. Our program is free for women to come into our care. Excuse me. We do sign them up for SNAP and Medicaid so that they have health insurance. And, you know, whatever their needs are, we just want to help them thrive because they've been through so much. I think my bio said we've helped 25 women. I think we're up to 30 something right now. But I did not change that. When you read it, I was like, oh, I need to go back and edit my bio. So anyway, I know that we're just about out of time and I don't want to take up more time, but please reach out if you have individuals that you think would benefit from our program. We're here to serve and we would love to be able to help. And I thank you for the opportunity to share today.
Thank you so much, Deb. I think it's just really helpful to hear, you know, about just the resources that are available and the ways that people can, you know, transition out of, you know, the life and go to a place where they can have healing and safety. Is there anybody either physically here or on the Zoom through in the chat who has a question for Deb?
So, sorry. Hi, Deb. It's Celia. So I guess just a quick question about, you know, kind of some continuity or, you know, the follow-up that you get once these individuals have left your home. You know, how do you still stay connected with them in some way? I know you mentioned the kind of support group. But, you know, is there like a anniversary thing or like a graduation, or is there some kind of follow-up after, or, you know, how do you stay connected, or do you need to stay connected to kind of see their progress, I guess, is what
that's really interesting because the women who are doing well are very, very much wanting to stay connected. You know, if they leave and they go back to the life, then it's pretty dark for a while. I had one individual that I could not find. I just had been so worried about her. She had been in our program, graduated from our program, had gotten her CNA license. She was doing phenomenal. And then there was when she was out, she just got connected with the wrong people and quickly fell off the deep end, ended up back in the hands of a trafficker. And I literally prayed for her, looked for her online. I was looking for her obituary, to be honest with you. About 2 weeks ago, she sent me an email and I just cried because I was like, she's alive and she's in another program. She had been through another rehab and she was in a transitional house. But one of the things I was going to say is if they come and they stay for a length of time, but then they go back out, it's always worse. It just gets worse. It gets more dangerous. And they find, we find that what they're subjecting themselves to just spirals very, very quickly. And that was the case for this individual. She had gotten connected with the drug cartel in Mexico, and she was just a huge mess. And so I was so grateful to hear back from her that she was doing well and that she was actually, had reached out to me again. So most of them we are in communication with on a regular basis, just checking in with them. They email me and ask me questions. And, sometimes they even try to connect with each other, which can be a good thing or a bad thing. Sometimes they're asking advice on, should I let so-and-so come and stay with me because I think she's using again and stuff like that. So yeah, we do a lot of follow-up to ensure that they're, for the ones that want it. Obviously not everybody does, but the ones that don't are typically the ones who are back in the life.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, we are nearing the end of our time here, and we so appreciate everything from all of you. You all lent a different perspective for me anyway, and so I really appreciate that. You know, I have everyone's contact info. If anyone, you know, feels they have a question or a thought or a situation that they want to talk over. I know I had to call Jennifer a few weeks ago with a call that I got at my office, and I appreciate you taking that, Jen, and just because I didn't know what to do. So there's people out there that can help. Jake, you're here. Do you have anything that you feel needs to be said?
Nope, just thank you for everyone taking an interest in this and wanting to get educated, because I think that's the big first step with something like this, is getting educated and seeing exactly what it is.
Okay. Lauren, anything you'd like to add?
I just am really pleased with the turnout and with everybody's, you know, just all the wisdom that's being shared right now, and everybody's interest in it. It's going to be a really serious help as we, you know, build foundation in Wyoming County and learn more about what this really looks like, so that we can step in to help those that might be at risk, you know, in our own roles.
So I guess we will leave it. We did put a little, you know, questionnaire just to see if you liked it, if you didn't, what you would change. I know the Zoom folks, if I can get them out to you, I will. And hopefully you'll email them back to me. But we do have a sub and a little bag of chips and a water for you to take on your way home. And you can certainly stick around. I don't know, Jake, if you could stay for a few minutes if someone has a question. And again, thanks to everybody.